everybody. Thank you for your patience, waiting for us in the lobby. Lovely to see all the faces ready for the webinar. We are almost ready to rock and roll here on webinar 3 of our gas focus from OTC. We already have planned webinar 4. We are very excited for that. And if you really want to be proactive, we're going to post the link in the chat box for you to have an early bird registration for the next webinar. But I will talk about the next webinar later again. 2 more minutes to allow everyone to come in. Yeah, so please use the chat box and scream out and say hi to whoever you want to say hi to. Would love to see everyone in person, but it's unfortunately not so easy when we're online. But online makes it easy that we don't have to travel. My colleagues know that last week it took me a record time to travel from Heidelberg to Durban, a full 24 hours. So yes, if we don't have to travel to get together, it's always such a bonus that we are able to just click an online meeting and get together. Any one of you recently had traveling, please share your travel experiences with me that I don't feel all alone, having been caught up in the traffic. So we're going to give 1 or 2 more minutes and see who else are willing to join us today. Never use notes. I see there's meeting notes activated as well. So we're here, so we learn. Okay, so if you want to take the time to already register for the next one, it would be lovely if we can see you next month again at webinar 4. We are trying to be consistent and we are trying not to skip a beat. Okay, I see, yeah, some people that I've met before, some people I know I'm going to meet in future. Looking forward to that. Okay, it is 10 o'clock and we are officially going to start. A little bit of admin. Please, at the top of your screen, there's a Q&A button and there's a chat button. If you have questions around the actual presentations the guys are doing today, please pop that in the Q&A. We saw last month, again, people pop it in the chat, and our facilitator for the Q&A has so much to do, they can't always check everything. So questions that you want the presenters to answer, please pop them in the Q&A link. But if you want generic chats or anything that does not necessarily need answering, please use the chat. It's nice to network a little bit like that on the chat as well. We would love to see more of you and to hear more of you. So yeah, the chat and the presentation. We will again host the Q&A session. We tried to, for the first hour, to do the presentations, some new and interesting things that we want to share with you. And then after the hour, we have normally tried to have half an hour Q&A, answer as many of the questions as you might have. So please sit through the Q&A if you are curious about that. We'd love to hear your questions and answer them. This is a 3rd webinar in our gas webinar series. The first one focused on the potential gas sources in South Africa, what is available in the future. The 2nd webinar, we really focused on Southern Africa, the inland, as a primary gas energy source. But today, we are going to look at pricing. That's one of the things we're going to look at: international pricing, local pricing, what will influence the price. And we're also going to look at why the hell must we invest in natural gas? Is there a future for that? Will it make sense today to invest, or is it going to be a short-term investment? So I'm very excited for 3 speakers today to share their ideas with you. If you are interested in any of the previous webinars and you've missed it, remember it's on YouTube. We leave all the webinars on YouTube, even the Q&As we post either on YouTube or on LinkedIn. So please make sure you follow those, and you can look at the whole series, and we try to start putting it together as a storyline from the one to the other. Thank you for all the messages we receive. It's heartwarming. It motivates us to carry on with this work. Okay, but today, webinar 3, we're going to talk about putting investment of natural gas into context. That is our focus today. Our first speaker is our external speaker for today, it's Jaco Human. So I'm first going to introduce Jaco, and then we will ask him to switch on his camera and talk to us. I shorten these CVs a lot for the sake of time, but there's so much more to each of these individuals that we can share with you. But Jaco has a master's degree of economics in the University of Stellenbosch, but currently he's a CEO of IGUA. Oh, I hope I pronounced it correctly. Industrial Gas Users Association of South Africa. Now, Jaco has a long list of responsibilities and things he's doing. Leadership to the industry on gas energy availability. Clearly the right person to talk about what he needs to talk about today. Policies, pricing, strategic consulting, advisory services, capital projects, supply chain optimization, and the list go on. Jaco, I am personally very curious to hear what you're going to share with us today on the topic gas contracting and price info.
For gas in South Africa today. So I hope this is visible. If not, just let me know. So, of course, IGUA SA is a representative of large industrial gas users, and these gas users are deeply dependent on gas in their operations. It's a broad spectrum of the economy, primary manufacturing up to the FMCG space, chemicals, construction, mining, etc. These organizations are, of course, faced now with a gas cliff, which has now been well known or well vented in the South African context. And as industry trying to find solutions for the gas cliff, it, of course, is directly exposed to commercial matters as well. So today, I just want to make one or two, given the time that we have, of course, one or two context points, and then we can go into sort of the detail around what we see in the gas price space, the price formation in particular, and contracting, and perhaps one or two comments on price levels as well. So, of course, we have to look at gas in the demand and supply context. The demand far outstripped. Since 2015, Sasol has not provided any additional molecules into the system. And of course, in the meantime, we are pivoting towards a gas economy in South Africa. If you read the policy documents carefully, of course, it simply means less coal, more gas, and more renewable energy going forward, in a nutshell. Now, if you look at these demand figures on the left-hand side, it consists of industrial demand, of course, demand that we envisage from power, private power generation, IRP, power station conversions, and then the logistics sector. So these are four particular sectors which are dependent on gas energy. Unfortunately, we see a lot of debate, of course, in the electricity space, and not necessarily electricity. And the whole renewable debate really plays out in one sector of the gas economy, whilst there's a need for, of course, industrial and logistics, and even maritime is becoming a large potential sector for gas in South Africa. Now, the other reality is, of course, is if you read the latest draft IRP, that asks for an additional 12.25 gigawatts over and above the previous one, we clearly have much more gas demand than what we can supply. That, in our estimation, if you simply peg this at a 40% base load, that requires about 300 petajoules over and above the numbers you see here on the demand curve. So the problem is we don't have infrastructure, we don't have upstream gas, and that immediately puts us or exposes us to LNG imports, at least until we have domestic gas availability. Now, over-reliance on LNG, in our opinion, is expensive at an economic level. We have been asleep at the wheel in terms of exploiting domestic gas resources, and we believe this is costing the economy about $4.2 billion a year in price differential between imported gas and the availability of domestic gas. The problem that we have, in order to meet the demand, we need to make significant midstream infrastructure investments. And at this point in time, there's no discernible project on the horizon to meet this demand. So we don't have infrastructure certainty nor investment frameworks to develop these. And this is something, of course, that we're advocating for at the moment. I don't want to delve into too much of these details, but safe to say that we have a gas cliff setting in. We believe that Maputo or Inhasaro complex even are critical to bridge this gas cliff. Richards Bay is not a gas cliff solution for the country. It is a regional solution for KZN. The South African government at this point in time has got very little involvement in addressing the gas cliff, something which, of course, we are engaging the government with unsuccessfully at this point in time. The gas to power play, of course, as you see the significant demand coming from gas in the power generation sector. Of course, it's an enabler for midstream infrastructure, but it comes with risk. There are no timelines, clear timelines around these investments coming about. Right now, an investment of roughly, in our estimation, of about $610 million is required in order to bridge the gas cliff. That, of course, needs to be borne out in price, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But the critical risks right now are time, the failure to underwrite from a guarantee perspective, these investments, and of course, this complete lack of transactional framework that we see between the public sector and the private sector at this point in time. Going forward, we see the onset of West Coast gas. Now, we firmly believe that the West Coast gas, and we will give you some of our price hypotheses on that as well, but the West Coast gas clearly has the potential to reignite the industrialization in South Africa, let alone power generation. So, of course, Richards Bay will keep continuing supporting KZN at the regional level. What is required right now is, of course, a new framework for investment and execution. And we'll set out some numbers, what we believe is required in order to meet this picture here that we see. The critical risk that we have, even at a country national level, is to execute the significant amount of projects that are being put out on plans at this point in time towards the end of 2040. From an investment perspective and pricing perspective, so the gas cliff, as we've said, the short-term transaction is the first $610 million that are required to bridge the gas cliff. This requires largely investment in terminal capacity to receive LNG regasified and inject that into the network. Richards Bay LNG, Coega LNG, the potential for the West Coast Gauteng pipeline. If you see the potential to bring gas in and capitalize on the resources on the West Coast, we need pipelines, estimated at about $6 billion. We need power stations, of course. If you look at the power station plans, which is further down on this list, the gas sector, whether it's between midstream and power generation, probably we're looking at about a $37 billion investment towards 2040. Significant amounts of money. And again, we're failing in terms of the fiscal frameworks. What we see on price at the moment, as the country pivots towards gas energy reliance at an industrial and power generation level, we see East Coast LNG, and this is the offers that we currently have in the marketplace at a delivered basis. In other words, it includes all pipeline tariffs, levies, terminal costs, molecule costs, etc. Offers ranging between $10 and $12 per gigajoule. Some of them are beyond that, of course. But the potential really here, and this is what excites us beyond the LNG transaction, probably after about 10 to 15 years, is the potential to capitalize on the West Coast gas. $6 to $8 range, we believe, is reasonable. And of course, it's a hypothesis at this point in time that needs some serious testing by stakeholders. But what is required is a very innovative risk-sharing model and transactional frameworks to enable all these investments to follow. I want to touch on some concepts around pricing. LNG price formation in particular. I'm not going to delve onto domestic or domestic gas pricing basis, but as we move and become reliant on LNG as a country right now, it is important to focus on this. Gas price formation, whether it's domestic gas or LNG, basically follow certain proxies. And these proxies, as you can see on the left-hand side, I'm not going to go through all of them, but we have oil price escalation, which is typically linked to, of course, right now, a large portion of our current gas is actually linked to oil price escalations indirectly. But LNG could, and we see the market currently anything between 12 and 15% of Brent-linked LNG potential. Gas on gas is very important, of course, in the gas on gas competition, or gas price competition is very important in the LNG market as well. We believe Henry Hub is a much more appropriate index for the South African market, purely because of its limited exposure to market fluctuations. And then, of course, we all know about the NBP and the TTF and so on. I'm not going to go into the bilateral space, but this is clearly what the government is trying to pursue at the moment, whether it is in Qatar or in America at the moment. But there are other regulated price bases as well. South Africa largely comes off the RCS, which is a regulated cost of service. In other words, it's a cost-based pricing approach, which is currently at play at the moment. As you can see on the right-hand side, if you consider LNG, and I would just want to focus on Africa. Africa, LNG imports is largely gas on gas competition. So this is the hub-based pricing that we see, and Henry Hub, and of course there are also Brent linked in that mix as well. Pipeline imports, it's a combination. Of course, oil price escalations, but also some RBC or regulated below cost gas as a matter of interest, and we see that playing out in the northern parts of Africa as well. It is important to note that as we pivot towards LNG, that the correct index and the market index is important to peg your pricing on. Flexibility is important. This is where spot pricing in the LNG market becomes very important. 35% of all LNG traded in the world is based on spot pricing. And we anticipate, however, that the South African market will be a combination of JKM, particularly in the flexible power generation space, together with OPE or a gas-on-gas competition-based price basis for LNG. Now, I want to talk about Henry Hub, Brent, and JKM and the formation of price. We typically, and this is the way we see it, there's roughly about 4 broad categories of pricing that makes up a total price. The first one, of course, is molecule. If you consider Henry Hub, of course, we can open up the internet today and look at what the Henry Hub quote is for the day. But prices are typically set on month in advance averages. So if I want to delivery next month, I would take the month in advance average price, contract price, or quoted price for Henry Hub. Now, Henry Hub doesn't stop there. Of course, it's a combination of further cost components. The next one typically is then what is referred to as a 15 to 20% margin, so to speak, on Henry Hub. But what it covers is the gas transportation cost to the liquefaction plant, pipeline costs, but also then the fixed cost, the liquefaction fuel. In other words, the gas cost to fuel the liquefaction process is included in that 15 to 20% markup. The next, let's call it cost line within the molecule price, is then the liquefaction capex, typically contained. And there, it's very important that the buyers understand what is the market-related liquefaction tolling contracts of the seller. These capacities are booked long in advance by large international oil companies, and they're fixed in terms of tariffs. It's a fixed portion of the cost, so to speak, but that it covers the capital expenditure, the return on and off capital for liquefaction. The next cost line in the molecule price is variable. and it refers to shipping, including boil-off gas, and then of course the OPEX of the liquefaction process, still on that side of the border, on that side of the ocean, if you wish. So here it's very important. The departure point for this is typically based on a market-related shipping cost between USA and Asia. Then, of course, the buyer, particularly in this region, needs to consider the delta for shipping. That is SA. So in other words, between SA and the source. Now, of course, the source could be ex-Nigeria, it could be ex-Mozambique in the future, or possibly even the Gulf of America. So there's typically a delta involved, which then reduces the shipping cost for this region. Next one is then the market-related liquefaction tolling. So the tolling contracts that deals with the operations cost, of course, of tolling. It's very important that the buyer understands what these market-related liquefaction costs are that the buyer imposes on the seller. Other elements in the contractual elements that needs to be considered in the molecule price, of course, is flexibility. So this is really where volume and term comes about. So what we see in this market are term contracts between 15 and 5 years, 5, 10, 15-year type options, but with various premiums, of course, or discounts, depending on from which angle you're looking at it. Then another cost that the seller or the buyer needs to understand is the typical margin that the seller makes over and above cost, in other words, all the above elements. So that then covers largely the molecule cost. Now, the molecule, we've now discovered Henry Hub, but Brent linked, you can take the entire Brent link. Typically, if you're a large buyer, it's upwards of 12.5% of Brent, which would then bring your molecule cost on a delivery ex-ship basis, let's say to a port on the east coast of South Africa. The other alternative is then simply the JKM spot. So the more complex one is the Henry Hub. Unfortunately, in the South African space, we only focused on Brent link. So we've got a regulatory gap at the moment in terms of those parties that want to contract on Henry Hub, and something which we trust the regulator would pick up with urgency. Storage and regas is the next sort of element in the total price makeup, and this is storage and regasification, FSRU costs or storage cost on land, and the regasification, and possibly a section of pipeline delivery to the network included in there. And there the buyer needs to understand what is the capital cost, of course, and from there the return on capital, return of capital, and the OPEX of systems like that. Transport cost. Regulated in South Africa at a distribution and transmission level is the next line. That brings then the gas to the point of consumption. And whether you're at the coast or inland, these costs are fairly transparent as it is in the regulated space. Very important then is the financial cost lastly, and this is the cost of the transaction. And we see here various elements. There's the infrastructure guarantees and the cost associated with that for the investments upstream to take place. Performance guarantees in these contracts, working capital. There are certain risk premiums and discounts that needs to be negotiated depending on areas and countries that are being operated in, and then of course the cost of administration. So from an LNG perspective, these are the typical, let's call it the main cost and pricing lines, and some insights into terms of what the buyer needs to consider. Now, heads of agreement, what do these contracts look like? I'm not going to go into everything in detail, but these heads of agreement, whether it's a Henry Hub or a Brent or a JKM linked price, of course, typically consist of conditions precedent. The parties negotiate an initial agreement in terms of stepping it in and framing it. As negotiations progress, delivery terms are very important. You get, of course, FOB. Mostly, we expect the South African market will be delivery ex-ship, including all shipping and liquefaction costs as we've explored. Then you have to consider the terminal user agreement, TUAs, and then the gas transportation agreements over and above, depending on where the risk and title transfers. Duration, 5, 10, 15 years possible. Quality of gas needs to be agreed by the parties. There's a typical range of LNG and other gases, of course. Quantities and flexibilities are an interesting one. We see the market quite capable of actually dealing with flexible quantities. And this is more appropriate than the power generation market. We anticipate much more demand on flexible power generation going forward, but it is possible to provide, if you have a baseline, depending on where that baseline is, of course, the over and above that require flexibility, but it is possible that we see to contract on that basis. Take or pay arrangements, very important in the LNG value chain. Guarantee support, like we said, infrastructure, credit support, performance guarantees, all those kind of things. The basis of price, very important. How is the price reviewed? Monthly, weekly, rand, dollar, who takes the exchange risk? Invoicing and payment goes without saying. The annual delivery program. So typically what happens in advance in the global LNG market, the delivery programs are set in advance, typically around about September every year for the period from January to December the next year. And from there you have 90-day delivery schedules as the logistics chain then firms up on the basis of the annual delivery program. Transportation arrangements, measuring, testing, destination flexibility, very important. The ability to reroute shipments in the event that demand is not required at the point of delivery, governing law liabilities, cancellation and termination rights, very important to negotiate into these contracts. And then, of course, the very important force majeure element and the principles around force majeure is very critical to capture very early on in the negotiations. And then, of course, many contracts include environmental, social, and government-related elements in these. Now, you may have an LNG contract for delivery on a DAS basis. If you want to use gas, you then need to move into the next space, which is a terminal user agreement, and then a gas transportation agreement. So it could well be a combination of all three types of agreements to enable delivery, or the seller or the buyer may agree to cut it at some of these points, whether it's at a DES basis or FOB if you wish, and then including a terminal cost. In other words, you're buying regasified LNG and then adding on the GTA on over and above that. Now, what we see on a long-term basis, if you consider these three key indices, so SA, like we said, South Africa is prone to a Henry Hub index. We believe it's more stable. The flexible portion in the total price makeup is relatively small compared to a Brent linked, where there's a direct comparison or with a movement in Brent. But what we see here is Henry Hub, of course. Remember, you've got to add all those other elements as well. And we anticipate that the contract price or the spot pricing market will ease towards 2028. And then, of course, you have your Brent pricing over and above that. So typically, you see these flexibility, which is seasonal in nature, and that's the northern, really the northern winter and demand side that plays out, providing you with that 6-month flexibility that you see there. Thank you very much. I think that concludes our conversation on the price. I hope that was of interest, and I understand that we will take some questions later. Thank you, Wilmien.
Jaco, I was so hoping that you give us an easy answer, that you tell us how easy it is to predict future prices. But I know we all know predictions are as easy as, and there are so many factors involved. But thank you for explaining to it. And all the presenters, I know the time limit we give you is very little, and I really appreciate how all of you are trying to take all of that loads of info and try to put it into a shortened version. Just makes us want to know more of what you are saying. Wonderful explanation that Jaco gave us on the bigger picture around pricing, but we're going to ask Andries to talk a little bit more about the inland viewpoint that we are having. Now I'm going to introduce Andries to you quickly, those of you who don't know him. He has a master's degree in chemical engineering, worked for a long time at Sasol, with a lot of experience that includes, but definitely not limited to, leading organization and people transformation, business management, business process organization, operating plants construction, real estate problems, SAP implementation, Andries, some of these things I think are more difficult than actual engineering. And a track record of so many other things he's involved in. Definitely someone with a wide variety of skills. But without further ado, Andries are going to talk to us about inland natural gas. Thank you, Andries, and over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Wilmien. I have the luxury of today just delving into much more of the technicalities, and it's a bit more technical conversation than the high levels that we have seen up to now. If you just go on a memory recall journey, let me do that for a moment just before I go into the presentation. When we started our first webinar, we indicated, and Wilmien has shared a couple of times, that the purpose here is to provide participants with information and knowledge such that they can make an informed decision as they go forward. Now, to be able to do that, there's obviously a number of factors you have to consider. So if you recall what Anton Putter presented on the first one, he spoke about what the base loads are, what people can afford, or the different customers can afford. And then he presented or spoke about the various sources of gas in South Africa and the scenarios that go around that. And essentially what was indicated that whether we like it or not, and you will also see that Jaco has shared that with us now, there is a shortage of gas, or there's an interim window where we see the gas cliff, as people would like to call it. And then the question is, when I'm a consumer or a user or an executive in a company, what do I do about it and how do I think about that? So the purposes of our webinar is really to also provide you with some information and give you a sense of some of the factors you have to consider when you look at making these decisions. That was the first webinar. The second one is then Koos and Freek showed you the vast amount of natural resources or gas available inland in South Africa or Southern Africa. And then also we had a presentation on biogas, which was also speaking about producing methane or natural gas, which can be done from the biogas. So now the reason I'm going slow is just that you understand we're going deeper and deeper as we go into our conversations to provide you with some of the technical detail. And Jaco certainly has pointed out and emphasized, and Jaco, thank you for that, that certainly when we start looking at exploiting inland natural gas, there is a regulatory framework and also governmental participation that is really needed and lacking at this point in time. So let me briefly share with you just some of the thinking or some of the analysis OTC has done and work that they have been involved in terms of what would be the potential price if we exploit or are in a position to make the natural gas in South Africa available. There's always a disclaimer on all these presentations, but it really says that the information that we've presented here it gives ranges as opposed to exact numbers, but it gives you a feel of how you're thinking about it. Typically, as Jaco's also explained, how you look at price breakdown. I'm not going to pause on this one too long. Freek and Koos spoke about this extensively, but you can see the significant number or numbers of TCF that we have potentially available in Southern Africa, which can be exploited. And then I see there the Namibian one is not necessarily in, and there's more and more speak about Namibia as well, which I'm not sure if I see the kudu there, but okay. So there's really a lot of gas available, but which needs to be exploited or developed. The other thing which was spoken about, and also not to pause here unduly, if we look at the models that we see into the future, and this is not obviously a categoric statement, but we're looking at decentralized supply of energy through various means. It could be through LNG, could be through imported LNG, also inland LNG, and then also electricity, etc., etc. So we're starting to see that, and then renewables obviously is in that category as well. And that gives you a couple of really benefits which one can look at. If I dive deeper and deeper, we then say, well, okay, if we look at developing the South African gas resources, and probably most of you have heard this, well, it's not a storyline, but the reality of what you need to get to develop the gas resources. There's a number of factors that comes at play, and not to go through them word by word, but you have to look at the availability of the gas, and we see there's a lot of gas. If you look at the top left-hand side there, infrastructure, Jaco has mentioned the lack of infrastructure and the significant investment that has to be made in South Africa, both on from the West Coast and then also on the Eastern Seaboard. What is the demand? Jaco mentioned a very interesting number in terms of the overnight was a small number. I thought, Jaco, it was about 800 petajoules, and I think you mentioned 300 in excess, which you are seeing the demand in South Africa, the pent-up demand, which is very interesting in terms of the real need for supplying gas into the market other than coal and through renewables. The other one is logistics, reliability. No use of saying we have the gas available and it's not of good quality, if I can use that word, and also not reliable. So you have to be able to, as a customer or consumer, depend on that. But all of these things come at play when you start looking at the gas resources. So let me just go slow on this particular 2x2 matrix, which we have tried to put together in terms of the work that OTC has done. So if you look at the numbers, or the little circles which you see at the top there, that really is what you have to see as the infield gas price. So in other words, that would be $3 per gigajoule, $4 per gigajoule, $5, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Now that what we call the sustainable gas price in dollars per gigajoule is dependent on a couple of things. And you can see here on the right-hand side, a number of things come into play. In other words, drilling and well completion, the facilities that are available, the productivity of the well, and I'll explain that in a moment. Gas composition, verification. Methane content varies from about 85 to 98%. Obviously, 98% is preferable, but you don't always get that. And then you have to do some cleanup in terms of removing CO2, water, and then nitrogen, etc. The other thing is then also the scale of development and also the scale of which you can actually develop this particular field. So back to the matrix, you've got the gas prices there. Then you've got the productivity for a particular well. And on the left-hand side, you can see, if you see a well producing at 17,500 per year, gigajoules per year, or per annum, 35 and 52. So that's the scale on the left-hand side. And then on the bottom, what we have done here is to say, we've taken a typical or the middle of the range, where we see about 650,000 to develop a particular well, dollars to develop a well. And then we've run two other sets of numbers in terms of where you see it being 500,000 per well, and then something like 910, in other words, 900,000 plus in terms of developing the well. So if you then look at what we are seeing currently in the fields, or the gas that is becoming available, you're running in the region of, and that's that big red blob there at the bottom, which says you're running between 12 and 15 rand per $8 per gigajoule, and that is much larger than, or much higher than, what people are, or the consumers are paying, with the target being hopefully over the longer term that we can get to something in the region of 3-4 something in the order of 6. So looking or trying to move to the left-hand quadrant. I'm going to come back to this matrix right at the end of my presentation, but I just want to show you when we look at some of the developments and where these prices come out at. The first thing, and not to pause here and not to explain technical detail, but it's not just a simple thing of drilling a hole or punching a hole into the ground and getting out a set of gas and putting it into a switch yard or a gas power plant. You have to actually clean up the gas as well. You have to then do the water treatment and do something with that. So when you actually put you drill the well, there's a number of things that come out, and all of these things contribute to the actual price that eventually comes out at the wellhead. Let me put it that way. We've taken 3 or 4 different options to say how what would the typical prices be. So if you look at the infield, so you've got the gas and you're really supplying it directly into a gas engine power plant. You're looking at a gas price of about $4 to $9 per gigajoule. And the question is, what can the consumer then afford? And we have then looked at that, and that says they can afford between $6 to $10 per gigajoule. So we're looking at the base load that can afford that particular price. If you move to another scenario and you say, well, okay, I'm now going to not supply it into a gas power plant, but I actually put it into a gas network, and then I actually supply it to an end customer, you'll see the table on the left-hand side starts indicating what OTC has seen it would cost typically, or what's the affordable gas price for different users. And it varies. So you can see that certainly GTL facilities and other derivatives would start falling out once you start seeing a gas price in the order of 8 to 13. I have left in baseload generation because it could be marginal and it could be something which could be negotiated. But if you compare the first one, where we were at about $6 to $8 per gigajoule, we're starting, let me just go back to check my number there, 4 to 9, you're then starting to see about a additional $4 per gigajoule, which comes in with gas cleanup and actually doing the compression, assuming you have to compress. So there's a couple of factors at play. That's why we say we're actually looking at a range. The other option which we looked at, and I'm running a bit quicker now, is where you actually have a gas pipeline. And if you look at that one drawing that Jaco had shown, and which also in our very first presentation shown by S&P, the people that presented on a lean, certainly pipelines is the way to go. But you can see the big fat bold words out there that says, well, you're going to have to put in a large investment, but the lowest price is possible on the longer term. And then what you can see here, so what we mean there, we can't give you a firm number there or a firm range, even though we indicated at the top, but this is really dependent on the distance of the pipeline, the capital required, and then the base gas load or the base load, which then determines what would be the price over the longer term. To echo again what Jaco said, he showed that hopefully we can see there's something price in the region of $6 to $8 per gigajoule. Last but not least, you can do virtual LNG pipeline supply, where you then have, and if you put all the components in, you have to now do water knockout, gas conditioning and polishing. You compress this to about 40-45 bar, and you put it through a small LNG plant. Then you're looking at a price range in the order of $11 to $17 per gigajoule. Once again, subject to quality of gas, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so just back to the matrix I've shown you. So all of those things show, if you look at the prices that we are currently here, critical components is certainly the regulatory environment. Apologies for struggling there a bit with the words, and that if we can get that right, we can potentially go to prices in the order of $3 to $6 per gigajoule. 3 might be a bit optimistic, but subject to the well productivity. Just some key thoughts, and then I'll end off for men. It just confirms what we have been saying over and over and over and over. There's a lot of gas available inland. Various factors are at play. We see certain sectors can actually afford the inland gas price, even though it's a bit higher than what they're currently paying. To develop gas fuel is not cheap. If you look at about a 60,000 ton, that's a 3 petajoule fuel, you're looking at about $80 million to develop that. To achieve the lower gas prices, and I've chosen my words carefully, a concerted joint effort is required, which means it's private sector and also government to make sure that this happens, and it's also across country borders that might also be required. And then just to make sure I don't go over my time, that just gives you a confirmation of the prices that we spoke about. Wilmien, thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Andries, for that. More complications, but it's doable. We just need all the money to build that pipeline. And if we have that, there's no turning back. Easier said than done. Last but not least, we have Jurie Steyn, who's going to speak to us on fuel and feedstock in the long term. I've worked with Jurie a little bit in my Sasol days. Jurie, also a chemical engineer, but more than 40 years of experience covering process development, process engineering, project management, operations management. It feels to me it's the whole list, hey? Environmental, health, safety engineering. But at OTC, he's the chairperson, involved in so many different things. Also, one of the people helping us on the background to make these webinars working for you. And with that, Jurie is going to talk to us about the fuel and feedstock for the long term. Thank you, Jurie.
Thank you for the introduction, Wilmien, and a very good morning to all our attendees here this morning. And effectively looking at the title of my presentation, Natural Gas, Fuel and Feedstock for the Long Term, it basically tells you exactly what I'm going to say to you. Let me just get rid of that thing at the top, right? Not everybody in this webinar is a chemist or chemical engineer, so I thought to get back to some basics in my introduction. And just say natural gas is a naturally occurring mixture of gaseous hydrocarbons consisting primarily of methane, and that's about 95%. And you can have traces of ethane and butane, and carbon dioxide, nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, etc., etc. Methane itself, colorless and odorless, and it's the second largest greenhouse gas contributor to global climate change after carbon dioxide. Now, we all know that the energy landscape is evolving rapidly with a stated objective of achieving a hydrogen-based economy by 2050. And in talking about this, many speakers and authors acknowledge that natural gas and biogas has a role to play in this transition. And they refer to these gases as transition fuels, with the exception of Mr. Nick de Blok, who consistently calls it a destination fuel. I think destination fuel is good. I prefer just to call it a fuel. But the question that remains is what happens to these gases thereafter? Will the demand for natural gas suddenly stop? Will biogas not be produced anymore? And this is what I'm going to attempt to answer in this presentation. Current applications of natural gas, very simple. It's an energy carrier. It's used for power generation. It's used for grid balancing, for renewable energy. It ensures energy reliability in developing regions. It's used for heating and cooking, transportation, incineration of wastes, etc. And then as an industrial feedstock, it's important in steel production for the direct reduction of iron ore, glass making, because it's a very good way of controlling the temperatures accurately. But primarily it's for the production of synthesis gas, which is used for chemical production or purely for recovering hydrogen from the natural gas. If we look at natural gas as an energy carrier, if we look at complete combustion, this is the reaction. Methane plus oxygen gives you carbon dioxide, water, and heat, of course. You generate a lot of heat, which is what you want. Now, if you use natural gas as an energy carrier like this, if you burn the gas, you form 2.75 tons of carbon dioxide for every ton of methane that you use, which is a lot. I mean, typically this carbon dioxide would go into the atmosphere, and as indicated, it contributes to global warming. But I want to ask you to remember the figure of 2.75. If we look at carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, and climate change, this is just a little bit of background, but it is important for the discussion. I mean, carbon dioxide is problematic when emitted in excessive quantities because it's a greenhouse gas. It can cause ecological imbalances, and it contributes to acidifying the oceans. Greenhouse gases typically trap heat in the atmosphere, which contributes to climate change, and it drives extreme weather events. Now, there's a new term, the global warming potential. That's determined by its ability to trap heat in the atmosphere compared to the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. Now, carbon dioxide is assigned a global warming potential of 1. Now, compared to that, the global warming potential of methane is approximately 25, meaning that methane is 25 times more effective than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. Now, if we say that 1 ton methane is equivalent to 25 tons carbon dioxide, you can see that why we have flares at most factory installations and where they extract crude oil, etc. There's always a flare to burn off the gases. Yes, you don't want a flammable gas in the atmosphere, but also if you don't burn it, if you send the methane directly into the atmosphere, you're talking of equivalent to 25 tons of carbon dioxide compared to the 2.75 tons of carbon dioxide if you actually burn it. So it is better to burn waste gas than to just emit it into the atmosphere. But because of both these reasons, you don't want carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalents in the atmosphere. It's important that we very carefully look at how much methane and CO2 is emitted from any event. If we look at natural gas as an industrial feedstock, typically the natural gas must be reformed to produce synthesis gas or pure hydrogen, either in a steam methane reformer or in an autothermal reformer. In the steam methane reformer, this is the SMR reaction plus the water shift reaction will give you methane plus steam gives you carbon dioxide and hydrogen. And in the process, you produce 9 to 10 tons of carbon dioxide for every ton hydrogen that you produce. In an autothermal reaction, it's slightly better. The autothermal reaction, methane plus oxygen gives you carbon monoxide plus hydrogen, and that can be followed by the reaction up there in the water gas shift reaction. But in the process, you form 7 to 9 tons of carbon dioxide for every ton of water that you produce. Producing hydrogen in this manner gives you what is commonly referred to as grey hydrogen. You produce hydrogen from a fossil fuel, and a lot of CO2 is emitted to the atmosphere. It's as dirty as it gets. So therefore the term grey hydrogen. If you can capture some of the carbon dioxide produced in these processes, capture it and store it underground, carbon capture and storage. That's what CCS stands for. If you can combine the production of grey hydrogen with carbon capture and storage, you actually produce what is referred to as blue hydrogen. Now, if we look at emerging technologies, and it's important to consider emerging technologies because this is what, in my opinion, will help us ensure that natural gas continues to be a fuel and feedstock for the long term. Carbon capture and storage is very important. The concept has basically been proven in Norway, Canada, Australia, and the USA. South Africa has also gotten on board here, and the South African Carbon Capture and Storage Roadmap was developed by the South African National Energy Development Institute. They started with this in 2008, although their report was only published in 2013. Part of the activities was the production of an atlas of geological storage of carbon dioxide in South Africa. This came out in 2010. They drilled a test well in Leandra to evaluate how effective it could be in South Africa. It was actually a delayed process because they had difficulty in finding finance for it. But the pilot carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration research site was finally unveiled in Leandra last year, September. Now, this chart on the sheet is from the Atlas of Geological Storage of Carbon Dioxide in South Africa. And it says there are possibilities. You can see these small black dots in the center area. But unfortunately, 98% of the capacity for storage of CO2 is in the offshore areas, which is unfortunate because the ideal is, of course, to have your underground or capture and underground storage site as close as possible to the industrial hubs as possible. Another important emerging technology is the small-scale liquefaction of natural gas. And for the non-engineers, liquefied natural gas takes up typically 600 times less space than natural gas at room temperature. Small-scale liquefaction plants enable easier transport and storage of natural gas and biogas. And currently, natural gas liquefaction plants as small as 5,000 tons per annum are available to handle small localized gas resources. If we look at emerging technologies for hydrogen from natural gas, this is typically natural gas pyrolysis or the production of turquoise hydrogen. Pyrolysis is the thermal decomposition of methane at high temperatures in the absence of oxygen. Your reaction is you go from methane with the input of a lot of energy, you go to solid carbon and hydrogen. The good news is no carbon dioxide is produced, and solid carbon can either be captured, meaning you can bury it if necessary, or you can use it. And depending on the technology chosen, you can produce your solid carbon either as a waste product, as soot, as carbon black, which you can use in rubber or in pigments or in inks, or it can be in the form of graphitic carbon, which is used in batteries, fuel cells, and lubricants. And some of the newer technologies even produce nanomaterials, nanotubes, graphene, or nanofibers. These are used in electronics, structural materials, and for energy storage. And from effectively a zero value, it goes to an extremely high value when you talk nanomaterials. Now, just to show that engineers and scientists are not boring people, but interesting, the 4 colors of hydrogen on the left-hand side, the right-hand side, we've spoken about gray and blue. Turquoise means you start off with a fossil fuel and you produce the hydrogen without generating any carbon dioxide, which is great. And the last one is green hydrogen, where you produce hydrogen through electrolysis from solar energy or wind energy. The turquoise is not quite there, but it's definitely on its way there. The pyrolysis of natural gas, the different processes. Plasma pyrolysis uses a plasma torch to generate ultra-high temperatures. It can be up to 3,000 degrees Celsius. And there, methane breaks down into hydrogen and carbon in milliseconds. I've given some names of companies that actually do that. Ineratec is in Germany. Molten metal pyrolysis, where you have methane bubbling through a molten metal bath, typically tin, lead, or bismuth, at 900 to 1200 degrees C. The decomposition of the gas occurs in the liquid phase, separating hydrogen and solid carbon. This is done by Monolith and Graphitic Energy. And Burnstar, interesting thing, Burnstar is a local company. Catalytic methane pyrolysis uses metal catalysts like nickel, iron, cobalt to crack methane at lower temperatures. This is around 600 to 900 degrees Celsius. And this promotes the formation of nanomaterials. It's done by a Finnish company, Hycamite, Australian company, Hazer Group, and the Canadian Icona. And solar thermal methane pyrolysis they use concentrated solar energy to drive endothermic pyrolysis reactions. This is done through solar heat capture by heliostats and solar towers. And this is really in the early development phase, done by universities and so on. ETH in Zurich is a forerunner there. I'm getting close to the end, but we have to talk about biogas as a renewable energy solution. And as you all know, biogas is a gas produced from organic materials by anaerobic digestion, where bacteria break down these materials in the absence of oxygen. This digestion produces a mixture of gases, primarily methane and carbon dioxide, with methane, of course, being the energy carrier. And if you remove the carbon dioxide from the biogas, one ends up with a product with the same composition as natural gas. Now, importantly, biogas is carbon neutral because the emissions from biomass processing and combustion are offset during plant growth through carbon dioxide uptake through photosynthesis. And if you combine the production of biogas with carbon capture and storage, you actually have a fuel and feedstock which is carbon negative. In summary, looking at everything I've said, and I know I've covered many different areas very quickly, but both natural gas and biogas will play vital roles in the future energy mix. Natural gas will be in use for many decades to come for synthesis gas and hydrogen production, although newer technologies may be used instead of the steam methane reforming or autothermal reforming processes that are currently in use. Biogas from organic materials like animal waste, food waste, and power crops will be an integral part of any future energy mix, no matter how long you look into the future. And emerging technologies like methane pyrolysis, carbon capture and storage, and small-scale liquefaction are critical technologies for future energy systems. I thank you very much for your attendance, and with that, Wilmin, it's back to you.
Thank you, Jurie. Very excited to see how these future technologies are going to change and help us to do things more sustainably and more with better stewardship into the future. I can't believe an hour has flown by so quickly. A lot of food for thought that our presenters has been given us. Just again, a reminder that this webinar is recorded. It will be loaded onto YouTube. We will post the YouTube links for you. We will email it to you so that you can look at all the previous webinars as well. Now, we're very excited. We already have the next webinar in the planning phase. It will happen on the 8th of May. The focus will be natural gas powering progress in South Africa. We are trying to bring a few case studies and few examples where some of the manufacturing units have already started to change towards natural gas, or not changed to it, but studied it and have real numbers in place. So we will present a few examples and case studies of conversions from other power sources to natural gas and show that it's feasible and possible. We have that early registration link. We will put it in the chat box as well if you want to start registering for that. So remember to check out our YouTube channel, check out our LinkedIn page where we will have all the up and coming and newest information available for you. Your participation keeps us going to sharing our words and thoughts with you. So again, thank you. I hope to see you at the next webinar on the 8th of May. With that, goodbye. We're going to end the event, but the speakers can stay a few minutes longer. Thank you.